Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new ESO Guides video. This is the first of my new guides coming out for with Dragon Bones, and it is on group dynamics and how group dynamics work in ESO. And it's not that you can't play with these group dynamics, it's just they work the best, they're the best options no matter what. And that is called the Trinity dynamic. Tank, healer, damage dealer. And we're going to go over each of these by design of the game, not by player, community, picks or whatever, but by design of the game. That's how I'm going to explain it. So first off, we need to use this tool, which explains the different roles. So this is a tank role, and the tank itself, it says, absorbs damage from enemies and prevents allies from being attacked. Roles are used to create balanced groups for certain activities. And if you look here, this is the dungeon finder. This is for dungeon activity, group and dungeon activity. That's what it's designed for. So when you put together a group, it's best to go with a tank, a healer, which is heals and protects allies, keeping them alive throughout the battle, and number 3, the damage dealer. Focuses on dealing damage against enemies that pose a threat. That is the ideal design that the devs have created for this game in group dynamics. Now, these group dynamics go a lot farther. They go into a 12-man group, which doesn't mean you use two groups of identical designs, but instead you use 2 tanks, 2 healers, 8 DPS. And that's how the in-game design of Elder Scrolls is designed around, is you have your dungeons, which is kind of in-game. It's something you can do throughout gameplay. But the end game itself, like the max, hardest, most challenging content you can do, is always going to be trials. And trials are a different dynamic, but group dynamics play a lot into this. And we're going to go take a look at what the devs have to say about it also on the website. So let's go take a look at that as well. So when they talk about dungeons on their website, it says, in ESO, or in Elder Scrolls Online, dungeons are 4-player activities that require teamwork and coordination to complete and offer unique rewards not found anywhere else in the game. We all know this. But it says right here, unlike delves, and I want to highlight that, delves, smaller one-man dungeons that can be found in each zone. Now, they refer to delves as one-man dungeons. Now, a lot of people are going to say, but they're not, it requires sometimes a group, that kind of thing. But they're considered one-man dungeons by the development of the game design. Dungeons generally require a team of 2, and it says here 2 damage dealers, 1 tank, and 1 healer. We say generally, and if you look, generally is actually the one word that stands out of the whole paragraph, is generally. And it says, because while it is advised to have a team made up of these core roles, it is possible to complete some dungeons, and it even says some. It doesn't say all dungeons. Some dungeons with a more varied group, depending on the levels and skills of the players in question. It is even possible to complete some dungeons solo. Now, this is the main paragraph we're gonna be focusing on right now, and that's because of the way they term their own game in their own words. And that is that delves are solo play dungeons. Dungeons themselves are group play dungeons that should require a tank, a healer, and 2 damage dealers. Should. Now I'm saying should because they use generally. And they're right. It should. You should run these roles. It's going to give you the greatest opportunity of completion every time. But in normal dungeons, if you're playing with a lot of high CP players, you don't need that. Because those normal dungeons are different. And that's where how difficult our dungeons is going to come into play. Some dungeons are more difficult than others depending on several factors. For example, the dungeons in early zones such as Fungal Grotto and Stonefalls can be completed by a relatively low-level, inexperienced group. Note that while you can walk into a dungeon at any level, we recommend you reach level 10 before starting dungeon content. Later dungeons tend to be more difficult with this being especially true with dungeons found in the DLC content. In addition to this, I'm going to skip this next part because in addition to this, many dungeons also have second versions that contain the dungeon's story and features, and these are, indicated by the number 2. The dungeon's title, for example, Fungal Grotto 2, so they represent that. And it goes on to even talking for greater challenges, each dungeon also can also be completed in a veteran mode. Veteran mode is unlocked once you reach level 50. That's actually wrong, it's 45, when you can start doing vet dungeons. And increases the difficulty for the group by making the mobs and bosses even tougher. In turn, veteran mode runs reward players. Yeah, we know this. To take on a dungeon in veteran mode, select the veteran option in the group activity finder, which I just showed you, menu to do this. And then it even goes on to talking about the hard mode. So it lists down here. I'm going to go down further. I'm down in pledges. What are dungeons? So you can see here, these are all the dungeons they show. They don't show the new Dragon Bones because they're not out yet. But if you look, it shows right here. These are the Path 1 and 2 dungeons. For the normal dungeons, the base game dungeons. And the Path 1 dungeons are actually a lot easier on normal. The Path 2 dungeons are a lot more challenging on normal, but can still be completed on normal. Now, they advise players on their own website to start doing these dungeons at specific times. They also do it in the Dungeon Finder system itself. If you go to do a dungeon through the Dungeon Finder and you select specific dungeon, depending on what level you are, different dungeons open up at different times. Your normal dungeons will all open up at different times based on their level of difficulty. Where Vaults of Madness is going to be the final dungeon you unlock in normal, these ones here do not open up to you until you hit 45 now. But they're still open to you at any level. But Bloodroot Forge, Cradle of Shadows, Folkrit Hold, Fang Lair, Imperial City Ruins, Monsoon, Scale Color Peak, and White Gold Tower, as of Dragon Bones, will all open up to you at 45 for normal play through. The Path 2 dungeons will open up to you at normal playthrough on normal mode at 45 through the Dungeon Finder. Now, if you want to set your group to vet mode, you just click on this little shield and it changes it to vet. You click on this one to set it to normal, this to vet. And then if you're doing specific dungeons, you can choose vet or normal. It doesn't matter what your group finder's set at. You can pick, okay, I'm going to do the dailies, Undaunted Pledges, and the Undaunted Pledges are Spindle Clutch 2, Blackthorn Haven, or Blackheart Haven, and White Gold Tower. So I can choose to set them up that way, or I can say, you know what, I don't feel like doing White Gold Tower on vet mode because I know it's a lot more challenging because it's a DLC dungeon. I'm going to do it on normal. This is what a lot of people do when they pick their group dynamic or their role to play in a group. Now, a lot of people take the group dynamic a little too weird, in my opinion, but there is a truth. A tank is a tank, okay? No matter what you do with that tank, how you design your tank, it's always going to be a tank, first and foremost. Even if you're an off tank, you are still first and foremost a tank with the ability to do more. A tank itself, a general tank or a main tank, is always designed to be purely a tank all the time. And this is the difference between a main tank and an off tank. Now, for dungeon content, you can use a main tank and off tank to be the tank. It doesn't matter. In a vet dungeon, you can use a main tank or an off tank as the main tank. And that's because the health, the damage and stuff that you take in a dungeon is nowhere near what you take in a trial. Because trials are made for larger groups. And with having much larger groups, it requires a different dynamic. So it requires a different style of play. It does not stop the idea of tank, healer, damage dealer. Now, there is two types of tanks, and there is always two types of healers, and there is always two types of damage dealers. There is tanks and off-tank. Now, the term off-tank, a lot of people misunderstand. It can be a support tank. It can be a an offensive tank, if you will, or it can be an off tank that's still a tank but is designed to do more damage. And that's what offensive means. The off tank means offensive tank. Then you have your main tank, which is your defensive tank. Because in every group, you're going to have one tank who tanks everything all the time, and you're going to have an off tank who tanks when it's needed. So he tanks about 50% of the time. He's tanking. The other 50% of the time, he's really not going to be doing much besides dealing damage or supporting the group. Now, when it comes to groups dynamics, if you don't happen to have an off tank, let's say, or you don't happen to have a support person in your group, you can have a DPS character or a support character. And a support character doesn't mean they're not designed to do DPS. It means they bring certain utility to the group that the group doesn't have. Like, for example, to play a support character would be something like running Julianus with Spell Power Cure. You still have the ability to do DPS, but you're using Spell Power Cure to boost everyone's weapon damage. That's something a support character can do. And you can have a support DPS, you can have a support tank, or you can have a support healer. And it doesn't matter which category they're in, you're always going to have 2 tanks, 8 DPS, and 2 healers. But one of those healers can be the main healer, which is like the main tank. They're built nothing but for healing. Then you can run a support character. And a support character can do a lot of different things. And this is the same thing with the DPS. You can have 8 DPS or 7 DPS, 1 support, and then you can have a healer and another support. Where when that one support is needed more, that like, let's say your group splits up, you can take your 2 support characters into one group while taking that main healer into another group. And those 2 support characters can bring up things that, like working together, they can work together to be as comparable to that healer. Or you can actually run tank, off tank, 8 DPS, and 2 healers. It's not advised normally to run 2 full healers in most group categories. It's better to run a healer and a support character. To always have a support in your group. The reason why you want a support character is because when they're not doing their support, they can do damage. And if they're not doing damage, then they can do support. Like when your group splits up. You send that support person with that group with the off tank, and you take the healer and keep them on that main group. And that support character goes into what's called healer mode. And they just do nothing but heals to keep the group alive, while still maintaining other things, like offering Spell Power Cure or doing different tactics. Because that's the group dynamic. It's utilizing your group's fullest potential. Now, there's 2 sets that you can use that are really supportive in the game. One is called Powerful Assault, and it's gotten with Telvar stones. I'll show you guys what it looks like. And this is a stamina-based support set. And you can see what it does. It does max health, max stamina, weapon damage, and then when you cast an assault ability, you increase the weapon and spell damage of up to 4 friendly targets within 10 meters of you for 164 for 15 seconds. Well, if you're playing in a group, and let's say you're the off tank, and you're running Powerful Assault because you want to do some more support for your group, you can run this set with like Vigor or Warhorn, and every time you fire it off, you're giving that boost to your group. You can run this set. Now, Spell Power Cure is the other set, and that's a dungeon set, and it comes in light armor. And it works very much the same. It is another support set, does very similar. Max Magicka, then the 4 pieces spell damage, and then the 5 pieces when you heal a friendly target that is at 100% health, you have a 50% chance to increase their weapon and spell damage by 249 for 10 seconds. Now, it doesn't list how many people this applies to, but it actually only applies to 6 people at a time. So you can run both these sets, Spell Power Cure and Powerful Assault, and here's how it works. Powerful Assault will apply to 4 people, increasing their weapon damage and spell damage by 149. Or, if you have a healer or a support character running this, then you have the ability to boost everyone's stuff. So you can boost their heals and you can boost their damage, spell damage, and their weapon damage with both sets at the same time, because they will stack, increasing the overall weapon and spell damage of the group. Now, is it wise to run Spell Power Cure on both healers? If you think it's advisable, yes. But you can also run a DPS with this. It doesn't just have to be a healer. The idea that a healer has to run it is what a lot of people run. But if you're playing like say a Templar DPS, and you want to run a couple support-capable skills, like say, for example, you want to run something like Cleansing Ritual, which is an AoE ground heal effect. You can take Extended Ritual, which is it does heals, greater heals, increases the duration and the amount of harmful effects cleansed from yourself, and it also does a lot of healing. Or you can take the other morph, Ritual of Retribution, which also does damage. So this would be the support version. Now I know you're going, how is this a support version? Because see, it does damage and it does healing. The damage it's doing is supporting the group's damage pool. The damage the group's doing in total. So this helps them do damage and it helps them heal at the same time. So this is what a support character would run. And if they are running this with Spell Power Cure, they can run this and still be part of the DPS group, because now they can do some support and DPS at the same time. They don't have to run Breath of Life or anything else, just this one to bring that extra damage. So that way they can get Spell Power Cure to apply to their allies. The other thing that they could utilize, other skills they can utilize, is something like Spear Shards. Now, Spear Shards, a lot of DPS or healers run this because they run Luminous Shards. Now, Luminous Shards, when you read what it says, send your spear into the heavens and bring it down, showering blah, blah, blah. It does so much magic damage every second for 8 seconds. But it also does magic damage on arrival. But it has a massively cool synergy. Somebody activates a synergy, they get both magicka and stamina returned. Depending on what's higher, they'll get more of it. So if you have more max magicka, you get magicka plus a little bit of stamina. If you have more stamina, you get more stamina, a little bit of magicka. This is where this is a really good support skill, but it's also really good for healers to use. But it's more of a support skill, just like this is more of a support skill. But this one increases the damage over time. This is better for somebody playing a damage dealer that wants to bring support. So they can utilize Blazing Spear, which does more damage, but it still does the same thing, except it doesn't give both magicka and stamina. It only gives one or the other, depending on what's higher. So if you're a magicka-based character, it can give you magicka. If you're a stamina-based character, it can give you stamina. Now, if you have the Undaunted passive down here, called Undaunted Command, anytime you use the synergy, you also get extra health, stamina, and magicka, depending on your pool size. Whatever is greater. Activating an ally's synergy restores 4% of your max health, stamina, or magicka. So as you can see, I have greater health, I get more health back, less stamina, a little bit less, I get a little bit more stamina than I do magicka. That's because my stamina pool is higher than my magicka pool. But if you're playing a DPS, the higher magicka pool you have, the better off you are. Because you're going to get more magicka back, less health and stamina. If you're playing a stamina DPS, you're going to get more stamina back, less magicka and health. That's how synergies work in the game, and that's why it's super important to have a good amount of synergies in your group, and why a lot of people run Spear Shards on Templars. But a lot of times when people play Templars, they're playing more of a group support character than they are playing a healer. And it's not that healers aren't meant to support. They are, but they're also meant to do things that help mitigate damage and heal them. That's their main role, is to help mitigate damage to the group and help heal. That's how they were designed by the development team. That's how they set the group dynamic. The community always utilizes the tools that they're given to create the best options. And a lot of times those options are really good, and sometimes they're even better. But right now we've been playing in this mindset of a singular idea, and that's because that's what the only thing we see most of the time. When people offer a tank build, their tanks are always playing the same, and it doesn't matter the class. If I was going to make a tank, a main tank, I'm going to be running something like Evan, Plague Doctors, this kind of thing. I'm going to be using an infused weapon, blah, 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 to give me the greatest advantage. But nobody plays a pure tank. Nobody plays an off tank. They're playing two off tanks that are built like pure tanks. And it doesn't, no MMO was designed with that in mind. Now, yes, this game does offer play how you want. And it is true. I can make a medium armor tank and be a main tank. It's just, I built them to be that way. Just like I can make a heavy armor tank that's just as good as that medium armor tank. And I can make a light armor tank that's just as good as both of them. But the benefits of the gear you're using works in different ways. See, like if you're going to make a medium armor tank, you want that medium armor tank to be a stamina-based tank. If you make a light armor tank, you want them to be focused more on magicka. Where when you make a heavy armor tank, you can go either or. It's just the benefits of how your resources are managed as a tank is going to be affected in the different types of gear you use. Because being a tank is about resource management, it's about effect management, and I say effect management, I mean things like taunt, minor maim, the debuffs that your character can apply. And a lot of people will look at a tank and go, well, if I'm tanking with this, I don't get this. And this is where the idea that sword and board is the only thing you can tank with. And it's not. It's the easiest to get into tanking with. Even if you look at the template system that the devs use, they even have most of the classes all start out with sword and board on the tank. And the reason why is because tanking with sword and board is the easiest to tank with. And it is the most efficient for main tanks to use. It doesn't mean it's the only thing you can main tank with, because they also created another item called the Destruction Staff. And I have certain skills unlocked on it, Trifocus and Ancient Knowledge. These are the things that make the Ice Staff the other option for main tanking. But in order for it to work really good as a main tank, you have to utilize it in a group dynamic way. Like if you played in a guild that was all mages, for example, having a magicka tank is your best option. Using a stamina tank is kind of useless to you because guess what? There's no reason to apply Major Fracture. Just Major Breach. Major Fracture is useless to you because guess what? None of your people are doing physical damage. They're all doing magicka-based damage. So this is where magicka tanks can be really good. Is, hey, guess what? We got a group of magicka people in our guild, and we don't really have a good, a really good tank for them. Well, I can make a magicka tank, and I'll tank for them. There you go. Or hey, you guys, you know what? Let's put together, a guild that's all based on magicka. Okay, boom, done. The game still allows to play how you want structure, but there's certain dynamics to it that are required. In small group play dungeons, a main tank or an off tank can be the main tank for a dungeon. And it doesn't matter the dungeon, because those dungeons are designed to work with that kind of categorical design. Like, oh, hey, guess what? I'm playing an off tank, two-handed tank. Okay, it'll work. They design it that way. But when it comes to trials, you always have a main tank and an off tank. And that off tank can tank just as good as that main tank, but he just brings a little bit more to the group when it comes to the ability to do damage. It's not that he brings the same utility as the main tank, because he's not supposed to. Because if he brings the same utility, he's useless 90% of the time, because he's just being a main tank. And he can't use his taunt on the boss because the main tank's got the taunt on there. The only time he should tank the boss is if the main tank dies. And he takes over the responsibility of main tank till the main tank gets brought back up. This is what main tank and off tanks do. See, and that's the misconception a lot of people have with the idea of group dynamics. A lot of people look at group dynamics and they say, well, if I'm going to play a healer, I want to be the meta healer because it's the best option. Well, it's the only option you're being given because that's all that's being made. But it doesn't mean that you have to play that way. And like I said, in some of my other videos, healers are healers. They're the best at group support when it comes to heals because they have to be designed that way. And this goes for the same for when you whatever role you're playing. If you're playing a damage dealer, you're a damage dealer. If you're built for support, you're built for support. If you're built to tank, you're built to tank. If you're built to off tank and support, that's what you're built to do. But if you build a healer to be a healer and support, you're support. You're not a healer anymore. And that's what we're running right now on the meta, is 2 support builds. What we're running right now in tanking is 2 tank builds. And what we're running DPS-wise is damage dealers. We're just running 8 damage dealers. But there is more to group dynamics than just that. Like, I can make a main tank and I can make an off tank. And I can run a trial and be effective. You just have to know when the main tank is needed with what boss and what encounter. And you need to know when the healer or the off tank is needed for what boss and what encounter. This is why they give us an option when it comes to skills for the main tank to have a main taunt and the off tank to have a single taunt. Because the off tank only needs a single taunt. Like when trash spawns in a room, it's the off tank's job to grab their attention while the main tank stays focused on one thing, the boss. The off tank will use that ranged taunt to grab the attention of that mob and keep it on him, and he can bring it over to him if he has the tools to do so. If he doesn't, he has to go to that enemy with a small portion of the group of the group and kill them. Sometimes it only takes 4 people. Sometimes it might take 8 people. Sometimes it might take 6, where you split the guild perfectly in half, or the group perfectly in half. It depends on the enemy's health pool. This is where group dynamics really work. See, and that's why I say that in a dungeon, you don't need 2 taunts. You need 1. And when you're taunting, let's say you're doing axes. Now it has come to my attention that axes can't be killed. Okay? Honestly, I didn't know this, because when I tanked the axes, I didn't tank the axes. I tanked the boss. Somebody else tanked the axes. And I did it with a 2-handed on the boss. And our group did fine. But that's because of the way the group dynamics work. Group dynamics allow you to split your group in different categories, different ways. Sometimes it's better to have the main tank do something that the off tank can't, like tank the axes, while the main off tank tanks the main boss, because he still has the tools to do that. And that's where a lot of people misinterpret or misunderstand the ability of having 2-handed tanks, ice staff, fire staff, lightning staff tanks, or sword and board and dual wield tanks, or dual wield and bow tanks. It's not that they can't do it. They work in a different dynamic. And if you don't utilize the dynamics of your group will not work. This is where the meta misunderstands what a lot of us say, or a lot of meta players misunderstand what a lot of us say, is there's a lot of options available for group dynamics. They're just not being utilized. And this is, again, why a lot of us say, oh, well, you can tank with this, and a lot of people say, oh, it's not possible. It doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work because you guys have been doing it wrong. Like when I see off tanks and I see them running Alkosh and Eben, I know it's wrong. Now, if they were to take Eben or Alkosh and say Night Mother's Gaze, now you're talking. But if they were to take Alkosh and say Fire, now you're talking. Now you're talking about making an off tank. When people say, well, Alkosh is there to help with the group damage, well, they're not built to do damage. They're still built to be tanks. And that's what you're forgetting. Is there's a big difference between a main tank and an off tank. A main tank is meant to do very little damage, but not to the degree that they do, just less damage than anyone else. Because their main role is to be defensive. That's their main role, is to be the most defensive character in the group. The off tank is meant to be defensive and offensive. That's where the idea of an off tank comes from. It'd be like if you put in a group King Arthur and Conan. King Arthur would be the main tank, Conan would be your off tank. Because he would be your barbarian destructive tank. He would still be able to tank like a beast, but he's there to do something else. And this is where, like, a lot of people also have the misconception of, like, oh, you don't need health recovery as a tank because you need healing. You need health recovery as a tank if you want to be good and survivable. If you want to be a main tank, having health recovery might be a better option if you have no heals to heal yourself with. If you have no heals to heal yourself with, then having the option of high health recovery is better for you. And some classes excel at this. The DK is one of them. Gets really good health recovery. But a Templar doesn't. They work better from healing received. Because heals will affect them more efficiently. The smallest heal could heal them for a lot. Like when you're playing a sword. They work off of health recovery really well. Some races work really good off of health recovery. And that's where their survivability, a lot of their survivability comes from, is self-reliance. See, when you play in a group, even though you're in a group, you have to be self-reliant just as much as you have to be group-reliant. And it's not about being selfish or being this or being that. It's about working as a team. Now, can a tank use Eben armor? Yes. Can they use Torag's Pact with it? Sure. As long as you build your tank to be a main tank. You build him to be the most efficient tank. I wouldn't be using Crusher, to be honest, on a main tank. And the reason why is because the efficiency of that main tank keeping up Crusher is not as effective as 1 DPS running Crusher. 1 DPS running Crusher has a 100% chance to keep 100% uptime 90% better than the tank does. Because they do a rotation of light and heavy attacks. And if they use on their main hand a Crusher enchant, and they use a Crusher enchant on their bow, and on their offhand they use a Nirnhone weapon, or if they use a Nirnhone main hand weapon, and their offhand weapons infused with Crusher, and their bows using Crusher, they get 100% uptime of Crusher. Endless Hail will keep Crusher applied continuously. This is why a lot of tanks are switching to staff on the back bar and dropping Wall of Elements, and so they can keep up a consistency of Crusher. Now, I've already tested it with a enchant of Crusher and Crusher on the back bar. and that you can keep up 100% Crusher on one DPS more effectively than you can with one tank. Or even two tanks. But you know what works even better? Is if your off-tank and your support healer are running Crusher enchants along with one DPS. This way you get a consecutive, no matter what, you're always getting Crusher applied, and it stays applied. It is a 100% uptime between the three of them. And if your group splits up, that one DPS stays with the main group, so he can keep Crusher up all the time. The other two go off with the other group and have 100% uptime of Crusher. Because that off-tank and that off-healer can do that. Or that support character can do that and keep the consistency valid. And this is where, again, a lot of people misunderstand the use of abilities versus the use of utilities. See, there's a difference between using abilities for utility. Because sometimes it's better to use abilities for utility purposes just as much as it is to apply damage. It would be like me using a two-handed weapon, using Crusher with Brawler to keep that damage tick of Crusher up, and then on the back bar I could run a sword and shield, and I could have Crusher on it as well. So if I need to block some attacks, I can throw up my sword and shield, or switch my sword and shield, and then when I'm on my front bar, where my two-handed is, where I'm focused on doing damage, guess what? I have Brawler to keep the damage shield up, and I can use other things to help me tank. This is the misconception a lot of people have between an off-tank and a main tank. But there's a lot of group dynamics you can use to create that greater DPS capability that's going to be better than sometimes the meta. And more efficient than the meta. And that's because, one, your tank's a tank. Your main tank is always a pure tank. Your off-tank is always an off-tank. But even when it comes to small group dynamics, that off-tank can tank a dungeon and be effective. Especially if they use the right setups. See, a lot of people have been running DPS, oh, well, I got to run this and this to be an effective DPS. But if you have your off-tank run, say, Night Mother's Gaze, a Crusher enchant, and, say, Alkosh, they're going to be more effective at tanking and keeping those things applied when they're not tanking. But when they're in a small group, like, say, a dungeon, guess what? They get all the same benefits as applying Major Breach, Major Fracture, and still have the effect of that enchant, the Crusher enchant, while in a dungeon. And can still effectively tank that dungeon with that two-handed sword and sword and shield on the back bar. Or if they wanted to, they could go two-handed sword and bow and still tank efficiently. Because they know the tools they have available to make them efficient tanks like that. And they might have to change some things up, like saying, okay, well, I'm in a dungeon, I'm not in my trial group, I don't need my Crushers, I need my hardening enchants to make me more defensive. So they have a bow and a two-handed that's got hardening on it. So that makes them more efficient two-handed tanks. So it's not that they can't be main tanks, they can be main tanks when it's needed. Because dungeons are a different kind of content than trials. And this is where the idea of, oh, you need a tank, a healer, and damage dealers, 2 damage dealers in a dungeon, but in a trial you need 2 tanks, 8 DPS, and 2 healers. When in reality you need 2 tanks, 8 damage dealers, a healer, and support. You need a main tank and an off tank, all that DPS, and that healer and that off healer, or that support character. And the reason you want a support character is because that support character can do some of the same things that the healer does. They just do it in a different way, and they offer a lot of support, but they also can offer a lot of damage. So that character, he's going to run something like, say, Spell Power Cure and Julianus, with a destruction staff and a resto staff, where the healer is going to run a resto so he can get more heals and be more effective at healing, and he's going to have a high spell recovery or magic recovery, while that other character is going to have a good recovery, but he's going to be focusing on doing damage when he's not healing, or she. And that goes same thing with the healer. When the healer's healing, that's their job. That's their job. They have to heal. And the more heals they have available, the more efficient they become. The more powerful the heals, the more efficient they become. This is why things like using combat prayer with like sanctuary is really good on any healer. Because the more you boost your healing effectiveness, the more critical you have, the better and stronger your heals are going to hit for. Now, a lot of people are like, yeah, but you don't need to overheal. Baloney. Try some of these encounters without overhealing. If you're not overhealing, you're not healing. And you don't have to super overheal, but those tools that they give you are out there to allow you greater healing capabilities to make your heals work better. The reason they give you sets like that is to give you greater strength in your character's overall ability. It's not to make you a weak healer, it's to make you the best healer you can possibly be. And that's it. And sometimes having group support for not only you, but the rest of your group is really good. And yes, the healer can do that, but guess who else can do that? The support character. They can run Sanctuary and Julianus, or Combat Prayer, or Wise Mage, because it's their job to help group support. And that means applying debuffs, applying buffs, applying shields, applying heals. But it's also focused on doing other things like dealing damage. You ever wonder why we get two different versions of orbs? This one, when you use it, it increases the damage. That's a support one. This one here gives you healing. The orb heals allies instead of damaging enemies. Well, that's because it's made for a healer. Support, healer. Example number 2. Increases the duration. Makes it last longer. Support skill. Increases the amount of the synergy heals for. Support skill. It's not meant to be a main healer skill, but a support character can bring this into a dungeon to give extra healing. And then when they're in a trial, they can set it down for extra healing. It's a support skill. You look at a lot of these skills in the game, and in a lot of ways, like even the resto staff. Let's just see, increases the duration. This means it lasts 1 tick longer than the other one. Okay? 1 tick longer. That means 1 more tick of healing. Healer. This one restores magicka for each friendly target hit the initial heal up to a maximum of 3 targets. So if you heal 3 targets, it gives you magicka. That can be both support and healer. Better for healer because it helps them maintain their pool. This is actually better for a support character to run because it increases the duration. Definitely support because it just heals. The heal over time is shorter and it ticks faster and more often. This one is more for a healer because their main job is to make sure people stay alive. You can still apply the tick heal and you can still apply the major heals. Support, healer, because it applies minor ward and minor resolve for a longer period of time. This one, support, because it grants minor berserk and increases to increase the damage of the allies. It also applies minor resolve and minor ward at a smaller amount of time. But a main healer can keep it up consistently better. This is why you run these kind of different abilities, is to give you these greater advantages. Ward ally. Cast 2 shields instead of 1, with 1 shield always on yourself. Support, healer. Support, healer. It's so you have greater utility of your character. And the same thing with Panacea. If you look at Panacea and you look at the two Moors, Life Giver also automatically casts Regeneration, Blessing and Protection, and Steadfast Ward. So this automatically casts those things on your allies. That is a healer's thing. Where if you look at Light's Champion, grants Major Force and Major Protection, increasing critical damage and reducing damage. Support. And if you even look at the skills in the Alliance Wars, and you look at the different Moors for Barrier, you have one that does healing and one that does ultimate generation. The one that does ultimate generation is the support one, because that gives them more capability to get that ultimate back so they can get more casts of this ability out the door without the need of anything else. This one is made for the healer, so that the healer can cast this and get a huge, larger damage shield with healing applied to it. And Purge, you have two different versions. You have one that costs less, which is the support one, and you have one that costs more, and if a negative effect is removed, it heals. That's the healer one. Works better if this is in light armor completely, because the bigger the number, no matter what percentage of removal you have, the removal of that percentage, the bigger, it will remove less or remove more. The smaller the number, the less it removes. Like this will drop to like 4,000 something. This drops to like 6,000 something, almost 5,000 something. If you're wearing 5 or 7 pieces of light armor. And that's why we have the options we do. Like if you're running a healer in 7 pieces of light armor, it's going to be more effective for you, because you're going to get higher health or magic recovery, you're going to get higher reduced cost of magic skills, and you're going to get greater spell warding. You're also going to get greater you're going to get the same amount of prodigy and concentration as a DPS. But these are the things that are more concerning to you because of the amount of skills that you use and the amount of recovery you need. The same thing goes with spell warding. If you're playing a magic DPS, you don't want to wear 7 pieces of light. You need that medium and you need that heavy armor extra because of their benefits. This one gives you dexterity, which increases your weapon critical, which you really don't need. But you do need Windwalker for stamina recovery, because even though you're in light armor, having a little bit better stamina recovery gives you the ability to do a little bit more, dodge rolls, that kind of thing. Having this gives you the cheaper dodge rolls. It's just cheaper by a small amount, but it's still something, especially when your champion points add to it. And just like with heavy armor, you get that greater amount of spell and physical resistance. Healers don't really need that. Damage dealers do, because they're closer to the front lines. They need that greater health recovery. They need that constitution benefit of small amount of magic return when they get hit. Same thing here. They need that higher increase of health. Healers don't need that. And then even if you look at the different weapons and choices and all this kind of stuff, there's always an option for something, whether it be tank, healer, DPS. And there's a good way to set up something and a bad way to set up something. The idea of group dynamics, though, is super important. And it's best to use the best group dynamic that you can. And that's where the idea of tank and off healer, or main tank, off tank, healer, and support have always played best in group dynamics. Especially when it comes to raids and stuff like that. Now, in some raids, it is good to take 2 full-on healers. Just like in some trials, it's going to be better to take 2 full healers than it is going to be taking a healer and a support. But it doesn't mean that you can't take 2 main tank, or a tank, an off tank, a support, and then 7 DPS, and then 2 healers. You can still do that and still be probably more effective if you did that. Sometimes you might need 2 tanks and a healer and support. It just depends on the encounter and how you choose to face it. And it's really up to the group and the dynamics of the group and how you choose to set your group up that's going to give you the greater effect. This is why group dynamics are super important, and that's why I wanted to create this guide. Now, there's a little bit more to the group dynamics that I wanted to go over, and that was something the devs say over here about trials. Trials are 12-player challenges for organized PvE group play, and are available in both normal and challenging veteran versions. Groups are pitted against the most aggressive types of encounters Tamriel has to offer. If your group is successful, you get better reward. You get rewarded for it. But here's the thing. They don't list what kind of group you need. They don't say you need 2 main tanks, 2 main healers. It says trials are 12-player challenges for organized PvE group play. It doesn't say, oh, and by the way, you need 2 tanks, 2 healers, and the rest DPS. Because every encounter in the game requires different dynamics. Every trial will work better with some dynamics over other dynamics. And that's because of the design of the trial. And this is why they make adjustments. They keep making adjustments to the meta, is because they're realizing that having a main tank in this in really defensive capabilities is a lot better, and utilizing an off tank. And they're still running Alkosh, Eben, and Bloodthorn or Bloodspawn on their off tanks, because they think that that's going to be the better option. Reality would be for that main tank or that off tank to run Alkosh, Kvetch's Gladiator, or Night Mother's Gaze or something that's going to give them the capabilities for greater damage. And it doesn't matter. You can still run Sword and Board on both bars if you want to. It's the extra damage your character brings, even though it's a small amount. The bigger that number gets, the more amount of damage you're bringing to the total group. It has nothing to do with how little or how much. It's that you're doing that. The more damage you bring per hit, the more damage it builds to the group's pool. And the main tank doesn't have time to focus on doing damage, because his job is to main tank. Your job is only to tank when necessary, which is, what, 50% of the time? The other 50%, when it's just your group against one boss, there's no reason for you to be doing anything other than the normal stuff you do, like popping Warhorn, using vigor, but also dealing damage. And this is why it's important to know your gear sets, know what your group has access to, and everything else. And it doesn't hurt to bring a couple DPS, possibly, that are built for some extra support. And bring 2 healers. Bring an off tank and a main tank. Or bring 2 tanks and bring 2 off tanks. Depending on the situation. Whatever the trial calls for, those are the dynamics you have to play by. Because those are the rules of that encounter. And sometimes playing safer is better than playing stupid. And I don't like to say people are playing stupid. It's just, if you're gonna play something that you're not comfortable with, that's being stupid. If you're gonna play something that you're comfortable with until you become better, that's the smartest thing you can do. And jumping right into playing the meta right after you hit max level isn't the smartest thing you can do. Even though you have some experience, it doesn't give you the experience of the trials. Playing smart first to get the trials down is the best option. Once you get comfortable with playing the trials and everything, you can relax on some of that stuff that you have on your tank, and then you can adjust your group to be more meta-centric if you want, to get more efficient runs. But it's up to you as a player to decide what's best for you. Don't let your group discourage you into playing something you're not comfortable with right away. Let them know. Say, look, I'm just not comfortable playing this yet. Let me play this way, get comfortable with the content. Once I'm comfortable with the content, I can start laxing on some of this other stuff. That's group dynamics. That's group organization. That's being a group and a team. And that's what group dynamics is all about. It's about utilizing the right stuff to make your group the most effective. It's about utilizing the right classes, skills, everything to make your group work really good. The idea that you can't play a tank and heal at the same time is just lost on the community. It doesn't mean it can't be done. It can be done, but your group has to be built around that idea that you're playing that build. And if they're not willing to compensate for it, that's your loss, not theirs. Or that's their loss, not yours. Because you know what you're going to bring to the table that no other tank is going to bring. You're going to bring that little bit of extra support. And this is where an off-tank can play support and still be a tank. Because they can bring some support to the group using things like Ritual of Retribution. Maybe bringing Breath of Life when they're not tanking. Using an Ice Staff and a Resto Staff. Or maybe even bringing Sword and Board and a Resto Staff. Whatever you choose. But if you're going to go Sword and Board and Resto Staff, remember this. You've got to meet certain requirements in order for those things to be effective. You're not being a DPS or a healer, you're being support. Support means bringing a little extra. Doesn't mean it can't be done, or that it's not efficient. It just means it works in a different way. And sometimes playing how you like is a lot more enjoyable than playing how they want you to play. Because, no offense, this is the one reason gripe I have with the meta. There's no options for what I want to play. You offer me an option in tanks that I want to play, I'll play it. I'll do the meta. Trust me, I will. But you want me to play the game and play by the meta? That will never happen. Mainly because I don't enjoy the DK as a tank. I just don't. I don't care how good it is. I don't enjoy it. Just like the Templar. I like it as a healer. It's cool and all, but I like to play it as support. Give me the option to do that, I'll do it. You don't, I won't. That's as easy as it works. And whether people like it or not, that's what people want. People want options. And if you're not willing to let options happen, then it just doesn't happen with your group. And that's fine. It doesn't have to. You can keep playing the meta. Other people will find ways. And that's it. Group dynamics are super important though. But that's pretty much it for this video, guys. If you like this guide, go ahead and hit that like button. If you guys want to hear more videos by me or see more videos by me, hit that subscribe button. Other than that, I want to thank you all for watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day. And this guy might see you in game. Bye.